You're listening to Inside the Village, where all news is local and no topic is off limits.
So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley. Hey, bully in the alley. So help me, Bob.
Welcome to Inside the Village, brought to you by True North Mortgage, where you'll get great advice and save a pile of cash online at truenorthmortgage.ca. I'm Scott Sexsmith alongside Michael Friscolanti, Editor-in-Chief here at Village Media. And this is a special episode, actually the first of two. This is part one of our look back on the year that was 2022.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that we're even going to look back on a show that it still feels like we started yesterday.
A show that we didn't even know would get to where it's gotten.
I think we need to talk about that too, right? I mean, this is like you said, episode 20-something, right?
26, yeah.
You know, and you look back, I came on board at Village in the beginning of the year, beginning of 2022, and as I was getting my feet wet, I met you, and then someone threw out the idea that, you know, maybe we should do a podcast. And we were like, yeah, you know, it could work. You know, we didn't really know how we were going to do it, what the format was going to be. But we did some brainstorm. We talked about it, and we did some trial runs. And, you know, I'm going to be honest. I didn't think it was going to go very well at the beginning. I thought it was going to. No. Let's be honest. If we ever aired some of the trials we did.
It was a dog's breakfast.
Yeah, not to say that it's great yet, but
it's marginally better.
It's much better than what it was. I mean, I was actually nervous after the first one because I thought, man, plus there was so much prep time, right? As you're preparing something, it's like launching a new website or something.
Absolutely.
Right? So you're putting a lot of legwork in.
And I think the other thing to point out too is, you know, you talk about evolution, and just like a lot of things that we do here at Village, the way it starts out isn't necessarily the way that it ends up.
Yeah.
And you talk about the prep work, and particularly you put the prep work in because, you know, you're the guy that's connected and the one with, you know, countless years of journalism experience. But we started with 3 interview segments per show.
Yeah.
Plus all the wraparounds and the editing and the work part. Of course, Derek Turner, our EP, or so that's a showbiz term, executive producer of Inside the Village. It's a lot of work, and it just became overwhelming.
Yeah, but it's a great point you make about Village being a place where we try a lot of things. That's something I have enjoyed a lot about being here, is that it is a place where we throw stuff at the wall and we see what sticks. A lot of places, not just in journalism, but in every industry, some places are afraid to try things, and they're used to staying in the status quo. So I did appreciate that we gave that a shot, and you're right. The original idea was, let's have 3 interviews on each weekly show. We'll have like a sort of a hard news segment, sort of another segment, and then maybe a softer segment at the end. And man, it was like a full-time job just trying to figure that out, which made you really respect the people who do that for a living. Right?
And the people who do it every day.
Every day, for sure.
And I remember thinking back, this will be easy. I mean, first of all, Frisco's going to do the lion's share of the work, so I'm just going to kick back and show up once a week and read some stuff.
Yeah, and that's funny because I was nervous the other way, that I was going to say, okay, like I have 0 broadcasting skills, so how is this going to sound professional and look for it? But sure enough, you do a great job of what you do. We have this, you know, the Derek does amazing at what his role is, and then we also have someone put a great tune together, and we have all this intro music, and all of a sudden we seem sort of professional.
Well, and you're missing a very key part to that, what you bring to the table, and certainly your journalistic experience speaks volumes. So, long story, even longer. It's worked out. Touch wood, touch fake wood to date. And when you look back at some of the stories that we've covered this year, we've really run the gamut from, you know, the opioid crisis to politics and elections, certainly the economy and inflation. We've run the gamut on what we've done.
And that's what struck me too as we started talking about doing a year in review. Is when you look back at the episodes, you think, oh yeah, we interviewed that person, we tackled that issue, and there's quite a variety of things that we went after. And so I think the plan for us is we're going to do an episode today and talk about some of the real serious stuff that we did and some of the really important stories that we're telling. And then next week maybe we'll do a little bit of a lighter side.
Absolutely. Sounds like a great plan, and we'll kick it off when Inside the Village returns after this.
From newsmakers to celebrities to other prominent guests, you'll find them all on Village Media's new interview series, Up Close and Personal. Join host Scott Sexsmith as he goes one-on-one with well-known Canadians to hear their story. Up Close and Personal. Look for it on your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Welcome back to part one of our year-ender here on Inside the Village with Michael Friscolanti, Editor-in-Chief at Village Media. I'm Scott Sexsmith. You know, we talk about doing 26 episodes to date, and I think it's only fair that we look back to where it all started on episode 1, and a story that I know resonated with both you and I, as it did with, you know, many people across the province, and that was the search for Katrina.
Yeah, and when I look back on that story and that episode, it really was one of the most powerful ones we did. Just to refresh everyone's memory, Katrina Blagden was a former soldier, served in Afghanistan. She went missing under strange circumstances where she was living in St. Catharines, and her family really rallied to try to get the word out, to try to find her. They were hanging posters in St. Catharines and Thorold and trying to get the word out as much as they could. What amazingly happened was on Facebook, this page called Trina's Army grew and grew and grew. Thousands of followers were there supporting the family, donating money, donating their time to search for her. And that's what made the story so special. Sadly, there are people that go missing, and it's not that kind of, but the public support of people that came forward to try to help find Trina was really powerful, really amazing. And we invited her sister Kelly Blagden and her mother Bonnie Lates to come on the show and talk about Trina, the type of person she was, and sort of the search. And what really sticks out is some of the things that Kelly told us.
Kelly, sometimes we can't go into certain details. Like you said, there's an active police investigation. It's difficult to point fingers. But are there people out there who aren't saying everything they know about what happened?
100%. Like 150%. There are people that could put an end to this pain, this part of the pain, so easily. And I know that. We know that. And that, like, not only to make a decision to take someone away from their lives, but to prolong the suffering, to not give that person the dignity they deserve.
Mm-hmm. Sadly, just a couple of weeks after that interview ran, we got the news, like everyone else, that Katrina's body had been found. Yeah. After an autopsy, the police announced that they did not suspect foul play. The family is continuing to look into what happened to her, continuing to investigate it on their own, and the Facebook page is still active, and we're following it as well.
We've covered a lot of tragic stories and issues over the past 26 episodes, and another one of those, of course, that seems to touch far too many people is the opioid crisis.
Absolutely, and it touches people in all communities, in all cities. And I have to say, our teams and in our cities that we cover have done a really great job in covering the opioid crisis. It's one of those difficult stories, it's difficult things to talk about, but our reporters are covering stories about the numbers, about the victims, about the families left behind, because it's an issue we need to keep front and center. It's something that we can't let policymakers forget about. Right. And so we do cover that very closely, and I know that for me, Scott, one of the people that really impacted me that we had on the guest was Christine Naylor, whose son Ryan died of an overdose a few years ago. And she's put all her energy to good, is the best way to put it. She is such an advocate for decriminalization, for safe supply. And listening to her talk, you just wonder, because this isn't just a grieving mother who's talking about losing her son. This is someone who is super educated on the issue and what needs to be done in order to lower the number and to help people who are struggling with this addiction. So when you listen to her talk, you wonder, how can anybody in power, anyone in politics, say that she's not right? So I really, that conversation for me was one of the best we've had.
And the numbers are shocking. I mean, if you look even the latest numbers from Ontario, there were the year that your son died in 2020 was at the time the worst year for toxic drug deaths. That's been since surpassed by 2021 statistics. 2,819 confirmed and probable opioid deaths in 2021, which is 15% higher than the 2,687 deaths in 2020. I worry, Christine, if we become numb to these numbers, we just hear them and say, most people just turn the page.
Absolutely. And so that's why I continue to share Ryan's story, as hard as it is to keep reliving the trauma that we went through with trying to get Ryan help. I feel we have to humanize it, because people just hear it. They just hear numbers and they are numb to the numbers, but those are not numbers. Those are real people. Those were people's sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, uncles, like best friends. And their losses have a huge impact on families and communities. And so this is a public health emergency. If we were losing this amount of people to any other, issue, there would be action on all levels of government. There's not, because we value these lives less. We have a judgment and a stigma towards people that use drugs, and we think that they cause this themselves. It's their fault, and we don't care about them. But we need to care about them, because nobody is immune, and it could be your child, your grandchild, next.
That wasn't the only piece of coverage, though, that we did on the opioid crisis. I know that you and the editorial staff ran a fantastic big read across the chain that really focused on the influence of Toronto street gangs and how they're moving into rural and northern Ontario. And you know what, Frisco, to me, that really opened up my eyes into how big of a problem this really is.
Yeah, what's great about that story is it kind of connected a whole bunch of dots on cases we saw, kind of pop up in the news, in the Orillia area and Sault Ste. Marie and Thunder Bay. And this idea that a lot of Toronto area street gangs have branched out, like a good business would, have branched out into smaller communities, like Espanola, Ontario, like a little town between Sudbury and Sault Ste. Marie. And so it really kind of was an eye-opener for me, too, even as that story came together, just about how many cases there were of, like, well-known Toronto street gangs, including guys who've been charged with gang activity in Toronto, dealing drugs in a place like Espanola, or on Manitoulin Island, which was just crazy. And I enjoyed it after we did that piece. One of the people interviewed in that piece was Antonio Nicasso, who's he's the world's leading organized crime expert, right? He is the guy to talk about organized crime. He was quoted in the piece, and he was kind enough to come on the show. And again, he was one of my favorite guests.
We've seen this here in Ontario, all across in rural communities, northern communities, First Nations communities. We wrote a large article, one of our big reads recently, about how Toronto-based street gangs are really branching out into northern Ontario, rural Ontario. I mean, we see it at least once a week, Antonio. The police are putting out a press release where they've arrested somebody dealing large amounts of fentanyl, and they're from Toronto. They're from Scarborough. They're from Etobicoke. I mean, are you seeing more and more of this? What's going on here?
Let's say that we have more than 375 street gangs, and at least that data released by the Criminal Intelligence Service of Canada in 2019, and those street gangs continue their involvement in high visibility crimes, and there is an increase, of course, of street gangs or smaller criminal groups in a smaller community. And so it's not like they abandon the larger city, but they move also in a smaller community.
Yeah, you're right, Frisco. He was one of my favorites as well, and such an interesting, smart man to listen to. I could sit and listen to him tell us stories all day long. The opioids crisis, though, continues to be a question that politicians, frankly, at all levels, need to step up and start answering. And it certainly was a very prominent issue in the provincial election.
For sure, we covered a lot of elections this year, right? We had the city municipal elections were all over our sites. It would do an excellent job of covering those, and the provincial election was this year as well. And again, something that our sites were built to do that. We cover elections really well. We're covering the candidates, the big issues, and then here on Inside the Village, our idea was let's reach out to the leaders of all four parties and say, hey, we're going to give you a chance to come on our show. Pitch your ideas, pitch your vision of the province to the people of Inside the Village, right?
That's right.
So we reached out to Doug Ford. We reached out to
Stephen Del Duca.
Why do I forget it?
He's such a memorable candidate.
Yeah, I know he's not the leader anymore. Isn't he amazing mayor?
He's a mayor.
Where is he the mayor? Isn't that that's terrible? I don't remember. But anyway, we did reach out to him. It shows you I don't remember because he didn't come on the show.
See?
Right?
That's what happens.
Neither did Doug Ford.
Nope.
But Andrea Horvath at the time, who was the NDP leader at the time, she did come on. And Mike Schreiner of the Greens came on.
Yeah.
And I have to say, they were some pretty fulsome conversations. I mean, we spent a lot of time with these two leaders, and it was a stretch run of the campaign, right? It was nearing the end when they came on the show, and both of them, felt really strongly about how they were going to do and how things were going to go, but ultimately didn't go their way.
I still want to know how Schreiner negotiated getting green walls in his hotel room.
I know. Maybe we'll start with him.
Mike, I think you mentioned before we got on the air that you're in Parry Sound, Muskoka, campaigning today for the local candidate there, and you're at a hotel. Is that a green wall behind you? Did you ask for that when you checked in?
I do have a green wall behind me, and it was. I did not ask for the green wall, but certainly happy to have the green wall behind me.
It's like it's fate.
We're going to paint Parry Sound, Muskoka green.
Yeah, I thought you brought it with you for the interview. That would be amazing. Mike, you don't live in a fantasy land. Obviously, you're a straight shooter and an honest guy. You're the first to admit that you're not going to become the Premier of Ontario on June 2nd. But I'm wondering, what does victory look like for you and your party? What would be a celebration for you?
I think increasing our seat count at Queen's Park and increasing our vote total across the province. I tell people, I think I'm qualified to be the Premier. And I would say, coming out of the leaders debate, a lot of people are saying, we wish you were going to be the Premier. But I also know there's a process that a new party has to go through. It's very similar to starting a business, or I've also started nonprofit organizations. You have to build over time. And if you look at Green parties in provinces across the country, much like the Ontario Greens, it's electing that first seat and then securing the second seat and then building from there.
It still kills me. Now, green hotel room walls is one thing, but to have plush velvet walls on your tour bus like Andrea Horvath did, that's something else.
We definitely want to get back to healthcare. And you talk about hope. One of the issues that I think has a lot of people feeling a little hopeless, a little helpless right now is the cost of living, right? Inflation is through the roof. People are seeing their prices at the grocery store and the gas pumps keep going up. I mean, what can an NDP government do to help a person who's struggling and standing at the grocery store saying, can I afford this today?
Yeah, the choices people are having to make are just heartbreaking. We talked about hope a little bit, but the fact that young people are giving up hope of ever owning their own homes, that they're stuck in their parents' basements much longer yet again. Into their 30s, and that's not good for anybody, for the young people or the parents, for that matter. But there's a couple of things. I mean, it's about making sure that some things that we can have an impact on are made more affordable. So things like housing, things like rent. So bringing rent controls back, making sure that we're taking speculation out of the market and helping young people to afford their first home with help with the down payment, but also making sure that those first homes are actually available, so that we have those starter homes, those missing middle homes rather, that help young people to get their foot in the door. But it's also about acknowledging that people are paying out of pocket for dental care. They're paying out of pocket for prescription drugs. They're paying out of pocket for mental health care. And I just want to take 1 minute to say, at the press conference I had this morning, yet another mom approached me about the crisis in mental health with young people particularly, but literally, and this is the absolute fact, every single time I'm out in the community doing a press conference, somebody from the neighborhood comes over and starts a conversation about mental health. So mental health and prescription drugs need to be paid for through your OHIP card. They need to be part of our public healthcare system. That not only takes a big burden off of people's pocketbook, but it also makes sure that people can be as well as possible, can stay healthy, don't have to go to emergency or to see a doctor when they're not well, because we're helping them to stay well.
I found both Mike and Andrea to be good, salt of the earth people, great discussions. Now, interior design aside, we should point out that Andrea subsequently left the post as the leader of the NDP party and is now the mayor of your former stomping grounds,
she's
the
mayor.
city of Hamilton.
Yeah, mayor of the Hammer. That's right, she is. And we should also point out too that Mike, as optimistic as he was that the Greens were going to win some seats in election, again, he was the only Green that did win a seat. And while we were gone, I did Google Stephen Del Duca, and just breaking news, he's the mayor of Vaughan now.
Any complaints can be sent to michael@villagemedia.ca. All right, our year-ender continues. Some great stuff in the first segment, and some really interesting stories to come in segment 2, and we'll dive into it right after this. When Inside the Village returns, brought to you by True North Mortgage, where you'll get great advice and save a pile of cash. Find them online at truenorthmortgage.ca. We're back after this.
She had my heart, very nearly.
For the latest in in-depth features and enterprise journalism from your local writers at Village Media, be sure to check out The Big Read. The Big Read. It's the full story behind the headlines. Look for The Big Read on your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Bob, it's bully in the alley. Hey, bully in the alley. So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley.
Welcome back to Inside the Village, our year-ender part 1. I'm Scott Sexsmith with Michael Friscolanti, our editor-in-chief here at Village Media. All right, September 8th, 2022, 96-year-old Queen Elizabeth II passes away.
Yeah. And remember, when you think of like big breaking news, that's right.
Huge.
That's right up there, right? That's
Yeah.
a global story, and it was typical. We were in the newsroom that day, and there was, I think, I don't know all the details, I don't remember, but the word was that, that the royal family had been summoned to where she was.
Yes.
There was this sense that things were bad, and every royal expert in the world was talking about how significant this was. And then, before you know it, the BBC's announcing that she had died.
Yeah, and I can't recall the chain of events, but I think it's the Archbishop of Canterbury that sent out that first note, and that's kind of what triggered, all of the speculation that it was imminent. And our good friend Patricia Treble, who you worked with for many years, kind of held our hands and walked us through everything.
Which was great because we thought, okay, who can we bring on to talk about this? And Patricia and I were both reporters at Maclean's for a long time. And it's fair to say on the side, she was a royal watcher. She did it. She wrote a lot of royal stories for us, but she did other things besides cover the royals. But it was really something that she cared deeply about and followed closely. And since she's left Maclean, she's been quite the royal watcher, and she has her. A lot of people look to her for the guidance on what's going on. So we had her come on the show, and it was kind of a get to see you again kind of episode.
Yeah.
But she really filled us in on some interesting things that I had no idea about.
Patricia, certainly the royal family, no stranger to controversy over the years. One of my takeaways from watching all of this over the last couple of weeks, and Frisco and I have certainly chatted about it, is the relationship between William and Harry, and I wonder if their grandmother's death is going to help them mend those broken fences. What's your take on that?
I don't know that we're going to see that. I think it's going to take time. Certainly from everything we saw, leading up to the funeral and the day of the funeral, there isn't really very much relationship at all. So I think we're going to see what's going to happen. I mean, obviously, William is now heir to the throne. He's now first in line. And over time, Harry's going to be slipping down. We're going to have to find out. I mean, the big the sort of Damocles kind of looming over everyone is that he has a book coming out. He has his memoirs coming out. Nobody really knows exactly when it's coming. The theory is that it's coming in November. Is he going to write another chapter because of the Queen's death? We don't know. But the assumption is that his father, who is now King Charles III, does not come off well in this book. And the assumption is that William does not come off well. So, if he's talking about all these intimate details within the royal family, which are never normally talked about, I don't know how much of a relationship we're going to have in the near future. I think the hope is that over time, everything will slowly fade. Certainly the king has made it clear that he wants Harry and his family within their lives. He's close to both his sons. And so this must be painful.
Such a tragic story, the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the impact that it had worldwide. But when you think about breaking news, one of the biggest breaking news story that we covered on more than one occasion is that of the economy.
Yeah, in my mind, that's the story of the year, right? The soaring inflation and the cost of living going through the roof. That's the story that impacts the average person, everybody. We all go to the grocery store. We've all seen the cost of groceries go through the roof. And we're all struggling to think, okay, how long is this going to last? What's my grocery going to bill be next year? And what I've enjoyed about this show is we brought on a lot of people who understand these issues. We've had multiple economists come on the show and talk to us about various aspects of inflation and the interest rates and what's ahead for the economy. And one of them specifically came on to talk about the grocery store.
Yeah, he did. And it's only fair that I introduce him because if you'll recall, when we taped the segment, I could not get this gentleman's name correct out of my mouth to save my life.
What was great about it, too, is he was getting a kick out of it. Mike loved that you could not get his name right.
I think he got more fun out of it than you or I did.
And let's point out, too, that Mike himself is a podcaster, right? And so he has his I don't know if that was his office or his home office, but he had it all set up. He looked better than us, his studio.
Sounded better than us, looked better than us.
Definitely looked better.
And mocked the hell out of us for a couple minutes. It was great.
He did.
So here, by popular demand, I'm going to try and get this right, is Professor Mike von Massow. The price of food has been going up at a faster pace than the overall rate of inflation for about 10 months now. Is there an end in sight, or is this the new normal?
Well, I'm not sure it's the new normal. Like, I don't think we're going to see 10% increases in prices forever. But I do think that we're likely to see price increases continue for the next few months for a variety of reasons. Low Canadian dollar, ongoing war in Ukraine, going to winter, and starting to get produce from the southern U.S. where it's very dry. So I hate to be sort of Debbie Downer here, but I'm not that optimistic in the short run about relief.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned some of those reasons, but can we speak to that? I mean, the average person is in the grocery aisle with their cart, and some of the prices are astronomical, right? When you think, holy cow, what I paid for chicken, for example, 2 years ago, it's gone through the roof. What are some of the reasons that you would say to a person who asked you, Professor, why this is happening?
Well, it's easy to blame the retailer, right? Because that's who we're giving our money to. But the truth is that the war in Ukraine has limited the export of wheat and vegetable oil, or at least oil seeds from the Ukraine, which has raised the global price of those products. So we're seeing vegetable oils, bakery products go up. It's also seen fuel prices go up, and almost all of our food gets shipped on trucks, so that impacts across the board. We've seen weather events. Last year Western Canada was very dry. This year most of the Midwest of the US was very dry, and so there are a variety of things, sort of a perfect storm of impacts all happening at the same time, which is making this worse than usual.
What was great about Mike, too, is that he can explain things to us in ways. I mean, this guy's an economist. He understands a lot of things that maybe you and I don't, but he can explain it to people in a way that makes a lot of sense. I think he's a guy we're going to have on again, because this is certainly not a story that's going to end. Another great guest who had a lot to say and really helped our readers understand things was Tim Hudak, former Conservative leader in Ontario, who is now the president of the Ontario Real Estate Association. And we had him come on to talk all about the up and down prices of real estate and where we're headed. And it was a pretty funny conversation, but really informative.
It certainly was. And if I recall, I think we focused on a particular property in the city of Guelph.
What happens is people focus on those viral stories they see, right? I mean, there's one that came out of Guelph this week. There was a house listed, and if you look at the photos, it looked like it was a crime scene in there, just a total dilapidated place. It was listed for $643,000. It had 32 offers and sold for $117,000 over the asking price. Wow. We just looked at the photos a couple minutes ago, and it's just wild. I mean, this is the bottom the question again. But when young people see that, how can they feel like they ever have a chance of getting into this market?
I totally get it. I mean, I wasn't after that house. You know what? My wife Debbie and I were, like many of your viewers and listeners, we would put an offer in and we'd think about the house. We talk about where the crib's going to go, kids playing in the backyard, and then you end up on the losing end. A week or two later, you do the same thing and end up on losing again. Like, I totally get that buyer frustration. And we do have an opportunity now, because the provincial election campaign is coming up. And I have no doubt that if you're in, Simcoe or the Sioux or in Niagara, where I'm from, home ownership and housing costs are going to be a top 3 issue. Mm-hmm. So I encourage folks that are part of this, watching on The Village, should go out and talk to their candidates of all political parties. Say, what are you going to do to help my son or daughter, or me and my wife, right, have a chance to own a home that we can afford?
Always time well spent with Tim Hudak, the former finance minister of the province and leader of the PC party that you alluded to, and I think certainly going to be a return guest to Inside the Village. He's welcome here anytime.
I think so. Real estate's definitely a story that everyone's talking about. The issue of affordable housing, especially with Doug Ford's plans now to make it easier for development, to put targets on how many houses we build in each community, the issue of the green belt. And when I think about all these issues, these are issues that our sites cover day in and day out. The issue of housing, rental costs, affordable housing. These are the issues that people in our communities are talking about, that they're concerned about, that we cover very closely, that we're asking difficult questions about. And, I think I sound like a broken record. A lot of guys say the same thing on this show a lot about local journalism, but I think it's important to hammer home that idea of that we are in these communities. Our journalists live in these communities, and we cover our hometowns where we live, right? And so we understand the struggle of someone trying to figure out how the heck do I afford a house in my home when the prices have skyrocketed, or they're concerned about the development of the green belt in their community, which is something that's on everyone's mind right now. So when I think about the work we do, the local journalism we do, that's where I feel like our biggest benefit is that we're there living in those communities, so we have the same concerns, the same questions, right? And I feel that way too when we have the tragic stories break in our communities, which we've seen a lot, which we see a lot, and we saw a lot this year. We saw in Barrie those 6 young people tragically killed in a car crash.
Yeah.
And when I think of that tragic story, I can't help but think how proud I am of the journalism we did on that. I mean, that is what we're supposed to do. We covered the story about what happened, but we also wrote beautiful stories about the victims in that case. And I think about, the national media showed up to Barrie for that story. But I still don't believe that they actually told the beautiful stories of these people and who they were, right? And then I think of the other tragic story in that community and in the Simcoe County that we covered this year, which is the shooting death of 2 South Simcoe police officers.
Yeah.
A story you know well.
Yeah, Constables Devin Northrup and Morgan Russell, and you talk about, and you're right, you amplify and every week sit in the studio and praise the work of your editorial team and staff, and rightfully so. It's in these tragic times and moments where the staff really shines.
And I think, and then again, it's not because I want to say that, oh, look at us, we're doing amazing work. I do think we're doing amazing work, but when those stories break, people in those communities have to know, well, where can I turn for some accurate information, some good information, some truthful information? Well, they turn to Barrie Today if it's in Barrie, or they turn to Innisfil Today if it's in Innisfil, because they know that that's I hate to use the word, but it's a beacon of reliable information, right? So when I think about those 2 officers, what a tragic story that was, and that shooting, how it unfolded, and as the news trickled out over the next few days, I just think of, we did our service as a local journalism site because we showed people we showed the accurate information, right? And we told the stories of those gentlemen, and I'm proud of that work that we did.
Absolutely. And the day that it did happen, we were fortunate enough to spend some time with Peter Leon, who is the comms director for the Barrie Police Service, and he kind of walked us through the day's events.
You're a retired OPP officer yourself, a longtime police officer. Now you are a civilian employee with the Barrie Police Services. You work in the communications department, so you deal with people like us. You deal with reporters a lot of times who give you a call. Maybe we can start from the beginning. Peter, how did you first hear of this incident when it unfolded on Tuesday night?
Well, I was at home. I was off duty, and we carry our phones with us wherever we go. And I received an email message from one of our media outlets here in the Barrie area, following up on some information that they had heard. Now, unfortunately, there was a great deal of misinformation that was taking place at the time things were starting to unfold. And information was initially received that it was, and the email I got was that our officers were involved from the Barrie Police Service. I very quickly started to make some phone inquiries to find out the validity of the inquiry. And it was a short time later that I was able to confirm that we were providing assistance at that time to members of the South Simcoe Police Service who had just been involved in a very, very serious incident in their area. In fact, we had officers on scene within 9 to 10 minutes, from what I understand, of that call for assistance going out.
What I really appreciated about our conversation with Peter too is that he's a guy who spent 35 years in uniform as a police officer. He's now a civilian employee doing media work for the Barrie Police, but he spent 35 years in uniform. So we asked him how much that weighs on you in the back of your mind. We all know police officers. We have friends and family who are police officers, and they know they go to calls. And this was, quote unquote, what we think is a routine call, right? That you're showing up to a door, there's been a phone call, someone's called 911, you're going to this house, something police officers across the province do every day. And how much it actually weighs on you. Do you go to work every day thinking, okay, you know what, I might go to a dangerous call and not know it? Or is it something you're able to block out? It's easy for the public to say, well, this was a routine call. Police officers get called to houses all the time. They get called to scenes all shift long. That's what you do for a living. And I'm just wondering if you can help people understand, as someone who wore the uniform for a long, long time, how much that weighs on you. Because every time you get a call, every time you go to serve a member of the community at their house or at a scene, it could turn violent like this one. It doesn't happen often, doesn't happen every time, but it can. Can you speak to that? Is that something that even after all those years you were as a police officer, that it weighed on you every day?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, I think that the public has to understand that there is no such thing as a routine call. Every call is unique in its own way, whether it's a response for a theft of a bicycle, a break and enter, whether you're responding to a person who has been a victim of an assault, or a more serious crime such as having to go and knock on somebody's door to do a death notification. These are all types of calls that are unique, and you have to treat each and every call independently of any other call that you've ever responded to. I think the thing that people need to realize is 9 times out of 10, we probably don't know the person who we're responding to that residence for, unless we've had dealings with them in the past. I think that, we're very fortunate in law enforcement that our call takers and dispatchers are relaying very valuable information to us as we're responding to these calls, so that if there has been previous calls for service, that we know or have a bit of an idea what we may be walking into. But like I say, the majority of the time, these are individuals who are reaching out for assistance, and we don't know who they are. It makes it difficult. And I know I've heard the term routine call for service many, many times. And that's something, as a communications person and somebody that has been dealing in corporate communications for many years, I try to correct, because in policing, there is no such thing as a routine call. That next call could be a very, very serious occurrence. And certainly that's what we saw last Tuesday evening.
Another story that was prominent in the headlines this past year was that of residential schools.
Yeah, it's a story that we've talked a lot about actually here on Inside the Village. And it's a story that is, in a lot of ways, Canadians are coming to grips with their history, right? I think it's something that they just weren't very aware of. They didn't understand what residential schools are, and they didn't even understand that we did a massive commission to get to the truth of what happened at residential schools. And the report was released a few years ago, kind of arrived without much attention paid to it, to be honest. And then we had the discovery of what appeared to be unmarked graves at some of these residential schools. And it really was a defining moment, I think, as a lot of people were like, whoa, wait a minute, what happened at these schools? And so it's a conversation we're having more and more. I think of the great story we had run across the chain, another big read, this one by James Hopkin, about Finding Emma. And it was piecing together the search for a residential school victim who never came home 100 years ago. Yeah. Her family still didn't know what happened to her. And so a relative was trying to piece together this story. So James kind of takes us on the journey of how she pieced it together and the people she met along the way. And it's one small snippet, one small piece of that history, right? But these are important stories to tell. And in advance of National Truth and Reconciliation Day in September, we wanted to have somebody on the show who could really just talk to us about what that experience was like someone who actually lived in a residential school, who grew up in a residential school. And we invited Mike Kagaji, who lives in Sault Ste. Marie, spent his whole childhood in a residential school, right? Really institutionalized. And I don't know about you, Scott, but for me, we've had a lot of interviews that really touched me that, really were emotional in some ways. But this one, I don't know if we topped it with this one.
With September 30th being the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, no better guest than Mike to join us on ITV this week, Frisco.
We really appreciate you taking all the time, Mike. These are the kind of conversations we think we need to be having right now. We should have been having them a long time ago, but we appreciate the chance to have it now. Mike, I just want to begin. I think you were in the residential school system. You've spoken a lot over your life about that system. You went to 3 different residential schools, I believe, from the age of three to the age of 17.
Yeah, until I was I went in there when I was 4,
mm-hmm.
and they asked me to leave when I was 7.
Just reading that, I shouldn't laugh, Mike, because just reading that is shocking, really, that someone could be in that system that long.
Yeah, during that time, those are your formative years as a child. And I didn't realize really until later on in my life. I had a better life when it goes back at my own history. I came out of those residential schools that broke and having no identity, and I took up drinking, I got into drugs, and I had a very difficult life for the first 20-some years of my life. From the time I was 17 until I was 41 or 42, and that's when I stopped drinking. And I've been sober now for 41 years and clean. And it wasn't after that until things started to make some sense in who I was. I didn't know who I am. I'd ask myself sometimes, who the hell am I? Who am I? I'd look in the mirror and I didn't know who I was. You see, you get your identity from your family. And I had no family. I came back home from residential school. My mother didn't know who I was, my older brother and I.
Mike, I'm wondering if you can even put into words for us and for our audience what it was like growing up in residential schools.
It's institutional. It's 100% institutional. I was just talking about that over the last couple of days. You go back to that little boy at 4 years old. The first thing that, when I walked into that building, the first thing that caught my attention was the electric lights. I come from a home, we had no electricity. We had coil oil lamps or candles, and I couldn't get over the brightness of it. But that would later play on me because I'd be sitting in a mall someday and I'd get a flashback and I'd get overcome. I'd go back to that little boy again. But there's no one fending for you. You're on your own. You're basically all by yourself. My older brother would kind of look after me a little bit. But yeah, if somebody do something wrong, you got nobody to protect you. So you learn at a very, very young age and how to adapt to the system to protect yourself. And you see all around you, you see children getting beat, you see children being molested, and you learn to stay away from that and how to avoid it, and all the shortcuts and all the quick ways of avoiding it, because you're basically fending for yourself. And I've never had a chance during those 12 and a half years to develop this persona that I would find later on in my life. And for me to find out who I was later on in my life, I'm still working on it today. I am a father of 5 children, 6 children. I count my last marriage. And I wasn't much of a father to them because I didn't know how to father. I'm a better grandfather today than I was a father. And I had no one to teach me how to be a father. I just didn't know, no one mothered me. So if you look back at the history of residential schools, and they went for 130 some years, at 100 per school, and you run the social multiplier, and we're a nation of people that grew up without mothers and fathers.
You're absolutely correct. Of all the stories that we've covered, and we've covered many over the past 26 episodes, I think that one left the studio very quiet. Mike left, and it was just you, Derek, and I sitting in here. And for a couple of minutes, it was pretty quiet.
And what struck me too is that you felt like there was hours more of conversation we could have had. Like if we could have sat here with him for 7 hours, we could have kept talking about more and more details about what that was like. But I guess we can only hope that it's an opportunity for someone who may not understand. And I still have people ask me all the time, I don't understand. Why are we talking so much about residential schools? You know, it's in the past. It's old news. Why are we talking about this? If you listen to that interview, it should open your eyes to what we're talking about.
And so important that we keep the conversation going.
Absolutely.
And we're going to do just that as we put a wrap on part 1 of Inside the Village. Part 2 coming up next week, and Frisco and I will be back to tee it up for you right after this.
Reporters, editors, and journalists who go the extra mile to get the story and get it right. Go behind the scenes with those who cover the stories that matter most to you and your community. Look for it in the Village Features section of your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Back to wrap on part 1 of our 2-part year-ender here on Inside the Village. 26 episodes deep. Some said it couldn't be done.
Yeah, it was me that said it couldn't be done.
I was going to say, you may have been one of them. We both may have been one of them and guilty of that. But here we are. It's been an incredible learning curve. a hell of a lot of fun. What stands out to you?
It's definitely been a lot of fun. Yeah, sometimes I think people think we're actually working. When down here in the basement, we sometimes get lost down here for a long time. But, I agree it's evolved a lot. We've changed a lot. The formats changed, those kind of things. But for me, what I'm most proud of is the mission stayed the same. The mission of the podcast was to highlight the fact that we're doing great local journalism across our markets every day and sort of bring some of those stories to people who may not have known about them because they don't live in those markets.
Right.
And at the same time, explain to people why local journalism matters, why having robust, strong local journalism is such a key part of being informed, a key to our democracy. It's just so important to have a place for reliable information in your community, and we're it. And I'm going to say that flat out, we're it. And so we wanted to do that. And at the same time, we also wanted to say, hey, there might be a big issue that's impacting people all over the province. So we want to have those conversations, whether it's about affordable housing, whether it's about the opioid crisis, whether it's about, even the Queen passing away has some relevance to people. Everyone has a Queen story. So we wanted to have those kind of conversations, and I've really enjoyed those. There's just been some guests that we kind of shot for the stars. So let's see if we can get this person to come on and talk. And they came on to chat with us, and they've just been wonderful conversations.
And as much as we've covered the hard-hitting side of journalism, we also covered the lighter side of journalism, and that will be the topic of part 2 next week.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be fun. Any
teases? Should we give anything away? Or
well, I got the teases. It's actually pretty funny, some of this stuff. But, that's what makes journalism bearable in a lot of ways, right? Is we cover these serious stories about death and destruction and prices going through the roof, and I can't find a place to live. But then sometimes we'll have Brittle Star come on the show and talk about something, and you just think, okay, maybe the world's going to be okay.
Let's hope so. All right. That's a wrap on part 1 of our 2-part year-ender here on Inside the Village. You can find us at insidethevillage.ca, wherever you get your favorite podcast, and, of course, across the Village Media Network. We're back next week with part 2. For Michael Friscolanti, Editor-in-Chief, Derek Turner, our Executive Producer, I'm Scott Sexsmith. We'll talk to you next Wednesday.
You've been listening to Inside the Village.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe, provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.